Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Picture this, a dressing room at Trent Bridge still ringing with the echoes of a guard of honour, still thick with the emotion of watching Ben Stokes walk out to bat for England one final time. The captain's whites are hung up, the armband is off, and into that silence steps a 27-year-old Yorkshireman with a test average that hasn't been touched by an Englishman in almost 60 years. And he says calmly, almost matter-of-factly, that he doesn't think you can turn down the England Test captaincy. Not won't, can't. That's the word Harry Brook used. And if you know anything about English cricket, about how loaded that job has been for generations of players who've taken it on and been chewed up by it, you'll know that can't turn it down is either the most naturally confident thing a man can say about the hardest job in the sport, or it's a declaration of intent from someone who has already decided in his own head that this is happening. Either way, England's cricket public just got handed the first real storyline of the post-Stokes era, and it's a doozy. Because let's be honest with ourselves for a second, English cricket doesn't do quiet successions. It doesn't do calm, sensible handovers where everyone nods and gets on with it. It does drama. It did Bristol. It did the Ashes surrender under Root before Stokes rode in on that white horse of relentless positivity and turned the whole thing into a fairground ride. And now, barely has the dust settled on Stokes' extraordinary farewell, mid-spell announcement, immediate wicket, a guard of honour from his own teammates and then another from the opposition. And finally, that last symbolic walkout to open the batting, then the pundits, the fans are already circling the one question that actually matters for the next decade of England Test cricket. Who wears the armband now? And Harry Brook has just told BBC Sport in no uncertain terms that if it's offered to him, he's taking it. No hesitation, no false modesty. No, I'll have to think about it, mate, it would be an honour, it would be a privilege, it's the pinnacle of our sport, and if I get asked, I'd be happy to do it. That's not the language of a man who's ambivalent about power. That's the language of a man who has been quietly building towards this moment for 2 years, ever since Stokes elevated him to vice-captain for the Ashes tour. Ever since the selectors handed him the white ball captaincy and effectively told the cricketing world in code that this man is the future. Well, the future just arrived a little earlier than anyone expected, and Brook is standing there with his hand up, waiting to be picked. Now, here's where it gets properly interesting, because this isn't just a story about who captains the Test team. Brook didn't stop there. He went further, much further. He said he believes it's possible, not easy, he was quick to clarify, but possible for him to captain England in all 3 formats simultaneously. Test cricket, one-day internationals, T20, the full house, 3 different games, 3 different rhythms, 3 different sets of tactical demands, and one man trying to marshal all of it at once. If that sounds ambitious to the point of borderline reckless, that's because it kind of is. The last man who tried to pull off that particular hat-trick was Andrew Strauss back in 2009, and his stint in charge of the T20 side lasted precisely 1 match before common sense, or the team management, or sheer physical reality intervened. 1 match. That's the precedent Brook is measuring himself against, and he knows it. And he's saying, I think it is possible anyway. You've got to admire the nerve of it, even if a small, sensible part of your brain is screaming that this is exactly the kind of overreach that burns players out by the age of 30. But let's give Brook his due here, because there is method in what sounds like madness. He made a genuinely interesting point about his own schedule that a lot of people might have missed in the excitement of the headline. He doesn't play franchise cricket. While half the England dressing room is jetting off to the IPL or the 100 or whatever glittering T20 circus is paying the bills that particular winter, Brook is largely absent from that merry-go-round, which means, in his own words, there are periods in his calendar when he simply isn't playing cricket at all. dead time, effectively, that other multi-format stars don't have. Time he says he'd use for fitness, for recovery, for getting his body and mind ready to lead across 3 formats rather than splintering himself across 3 different competing commercial commitments. It's actually a rather shrewd piece of self-analysis from a player who, let's remember, has copped criticism in the past for being reckless, for playing what Michael Vaughan rather brutally called absolutely pathetic cricket in certain moments. Here, at least, he sounds like a man who has actually thought this through. And the timing of all this could not be more relentless. We're talking about a player who, as of this week, has gone from the euphoric, emotionally exhausting final overs of a test series against New Zealand, a series that ended with Ben Stokes retiring mid-match, for heaven's sake, straight into preparation for a 5-match T20 series against India, starting at Chester-le Street. 5 matches against India, 2 days after England's Test summer against the Kiwis wrapped up. There was so little breathing room in that transition that Brook only met James Coles, the uncapped all-rounder, handed his maiden England call-up for the very first time at training on Tuesday. Read that again. The vice-captain of the Test side, a man being talked about as a genuine 3-format leadership option, didn't even have time to be introduced to a new teammate before turning up to train with him. That is the reality of the modern England cricketers' calendar, and it's the reality Brook is volunteering to make even heavier by potentially adding the Test captaincy on top of everything else he's already carrying. So why is this even a conversation? Why is Harry Brook, and not some grizzled elder statesman, the man being talked about as the 83rd person in history to captain England in Test cricket? Simple, because the numbers are, frankly, ridiculous. Brook's Test average sits at 53.04. Let that number breathe for a second. 53.04. That is the highest average of any Englishman to play Test cricket in almost 60 years. Not just of his generation, not just among current players, 6 decades. He is one of only 4 men to have scored a century in all 3 international formats while wearing the 3 lions, a stat that puts him in genuinely rarefied company. When Brendan McCullum stood up on Monday and said England had lots of options to replace Stokes, everybody in the room and everybody watching knew that was coach speak, for we have one very obvious option and a couple of alternatives we're contractually obliged to mention. Because let's talk about those alternatives, because this wouldn't be a proper Boundary Line UK story if we didn't lay out exactly who else is supposedly in the running, even if some of these names feel more like polite background noise than genuine contenders. Joe Root, Stokes' own predecessor as captain, remains, on paper, the other serious option. And there's a poetic symmetry to that possibility that shouldn't be dismissed lightly. The man who once captained England through some genuinely torrid times, who was there in the trenches before Stokes and McCullum turned the whole operation into an aggressive freewheeling circus. Stepping back into the role for a second act, Root deputised for Stokes already this summer. Remember when the captain missed the second test at the Oval while an investigation into a nightclub incident hung over him? Root took the reins that week and by every account did the steady, reliable job you'd expect from a man widely regarded, including, generously, by Brook himself, as potentially the greatest batter to ever play Test cricket for England. High praise, and Brook wasn't shy about giving it. Beyond Root, the field thins out fast. Ben Duckett, rock solid at the top of the order, isn't going anywhere from the side, but leadership speculation around him has been minimal. Jacob Bethell, 22 years old and already leading England in T20 cricket, represents the wild-card, long-term project option, a captain in waiting for a future England side rather than a realistic pick for right now. And then there's Ollie Robinson, an intriguing name if ever there was one, a bowler who actually captains his county side, Sussex, and yet remains anything but a guaranteed starter in the England Test sheet. Imagine handing the national captaincy to a man who can't currently nail down a regular spot in the team. It will be a genuinely startling move, the kind of left field selection that would dominate back pages for a fortnight, but realistically it feels like exactly that. A name mentioned for the sake of thoroughness rather than a genuine threat to Brook's position as favourite. Which brings us inevitably back to Wellington, because no conversation about Harry Brook's suitability for the captaincy is complete without wrestling with the incident that still shadows his reputation in certain corners of the English cricket press. On the eve of a one-day international against New Zealand, Brook was punched by a nightclub bouncer. Not a minor scuffle, not a war of words, a punch from a bouncer on the eve of an international fixture. It's the kind of story that writes its own headlines, and it did exactly that at the time. And crucially, it's a story that England's director of cricket, Rob Key, openly acknowledged played a part in why Brook wasn't handed the captaincy reins during Stokes' earlier absence at the Oval. Key didn't dress it up. He said there were many reasons Brook wasn't asked to deputise, and admitted his own involvement in a late-night incident during the winter was one of them. That's about as close as English cricket administration gets to publicly saying, "We didn't quite trust you with the armband yet, mate." And here's the thing about Brook's response to all of that, which tells you almost as much about his character as the incident itself. He didn't sulk about it. He didn't push back publicly or demand an explanation. He said flatly that giving the captaincy to Root that week was definitely the right decision. He called Root a stalwart of English cricket, said England needed him that week and that Root stepped up, and framed his own job that week as simply supporting his senior teammate as much as possible. That's a mature, level-headed response from a player who could quite easily have felt aggrieved at being passed over. Whether that maturity extends consistently onto the field of play is, admittedly, a slightly different question, one that brings us neatly to Michael Vaughan, because it wouldn't be an honest account of the Harry Brook captaincy conversation without acknowledging that not everybody is entirely sold on the idea of handing this particular 27-year-old the keys to the kingdom. Vaughan, never a man to hold back an opinion when a microphone is nearby, savaged Brook's innings on the fourth evening of the third test against New Zealand. An innings of 21 runs from just 9 balls that ended with Brook getting out playing an expansive shot at a moment when, in Vaughan's eyes at least, discretion would have been the better part of valour. Absolutely pathetic were the words Vaughan chose. Not measured criticism, not gentle needling, a public evisceration from a former England captain live on the airwaves of the man now being talked up as the next England captain. You couldn't script the timing better if you tried. And Brook's response to that criticism is genuinely worth sitting with for a moment, because it captures something essential about who he is as a cricketer and potentially as a future leader. He didn't apologise for the shot. He didn't promise to rein it in. He said people are allowed their opinions and that he always tries to do what's best for the side, which, in his mind, sometimes means going out there and putting pressure back on the opposition, playing what he candidly called daft shots here and there, and sometimes means digging in for a gritty rearguard innings to salvage a draw. That's a player who has made peace with the fact that his method, the aggressive, high-risk, high-reward method that has produced that extraordinary 53, 0.004 average, is going to occasionally look reckless in the moment and get torn apart by pundits who preferred a more cautious era of English batting. It's the Bazball philosophy distilled into one man's personal batting psychology, and it raises a fascinating question for England's decision-makers. Do you want a test captain whose default setting is aggression? Even when it occasionally produces nights like that one at Trent Bridge that get Michael Vaughan reaching for words like pathetic, there's also a broader, almost historical weight to all of this that Brook himself gestured towards, whether he fully intended to or not. The England Test captaincy has never just been about setting fields and declaring at the right time. It's a role that has, across the decades, carried England's players into moments far bigger than cricket itself. Think of Michael Atherton leading his team into a meeting with Nelson Mandela on England's first tour of post-apartheid South Africa back in 1995. A captain suddenly standing at the intersection of sport and genuine world history. Think of Ben Stokes himself only a few years ago, captaining England at the Oval when play was paused for the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a moment that turned an ordinary test match into a piece of national memory. Whoever takes this armband next isn't just inheriting a batting order and a bowling attack. They're inheriting the possibility that at any moment, the job could ask something of them that has nothing to do with cricket at all. Dignity in crisis, representing the country on the biggest possible stage, carrying the weight of history on their shoulders in a blazer and a pair of whites. Is Harry Brook ready for that? It's the question nobody can actually answer yet, because nobody, including Brook, knows exactly what circumstances he might inherit. What we do know is this: the raw numbers say he's arguably the best batter England has produced in half a century. The temperament, by his own account and by the accounts of those around him, is remarkably calm and grounded for someone constantly being pulled between white ball spectacle and test match grind. The ambition is unmistakable. He wants this job. He's said as much publicly on the record to the BBC without a hint of false modesty. And the counter-arguments, the Wellington incident, the Vaughan criticism, the sheer physical impossibility of leading 3 formats at once are real, substantial, and not to be waved away just because the headline numbers are so eye-catching. What's genuinely refreshing, though, is Brook's own attitude to the whole uncertain process. He's been crystal clear that the decision isn't his to make. It sits with people, in his words, well above him: Rob Key, Brendan McCullum, the England and Wales Cricket Board's selection machinery, whoever ultimately signs off on the 83rd man to lead England in Test cricket. And if that group decides Brook isn't the man, if they hand the armband to Root instead, or pull off some left field surprise nobody's currently talking about, Brook says he'll be absolutely fine with it. Whether he's captain or not, he just wants the 3 lions on his chest and to give it everything he's got. It's the kind of quote that could sound like empty diplomacy from a lesser player, but from a man averaging over 53 in Test cricket, it lands as something closer to quiet, earned confidence. He doesn't need the armband to matter to this England team. He's already one of its most important players. The captaincy would just be the crown on top of a game that's already speaking for itself. So where does this leave us? English cricket stands at one of those genuine crossroads moments, the kind that only comes around once every few years, when an era-defining captain steps away and the entire structure of the national team hangs in the balance for a few weeks while the powers that be work out what comes next. Ben Stokes redefined what England Test cricket could look like, dragged it out of a defensive crouch and turned it into box office theatre. Now the question is whether Harry Brook, 27 years old, statistically extraordinary, occasionally reckless, publicly ambitious and privately calm about rejection, is the man to carry that torch into the next chapter. He's told us in his own words that he can't turn it down if it's offered. He's told us he even thinks he can juggle all 3 formats at once against all recent historical precedent. And he's told us that if England say no, he'll shrug it off and keep scoring runs anyway. That's quite the position to be in. And it's exactly the kind of storyline that's going to dominate English cricket conversation right through this T20 series against India and well beyond it, all the way to whatever announcement eventually comes down from Rob Key's office. So here's what we want to know from you. Should Harry Brook be handed the England Test captaincy right now, off the back of that Ashes vice-captaincy and that phenomenal average? Or is Joe Root, with his experience, his temperament and his proven track record of stepping up at exactly the right moment, still the safer and smarter choice? And be honest, do you think a 3-format captain is actually realistic in the modern game? Or is Brook setting himself up for the same kind of burnout that ended Andrew Strauss's T20 tenure after a single match back in 2009? Drop your thoughts down in the comments because we want to hear exactly where you stand on this one. If you enjoyed this breakdown, do us a favour and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you'd think. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Boundary Line UK, because with the Test captaincy decision looming, a T20 series against India already underway, and the entire shape of the post-Stokes England team still being written in real time, there is a great deal more of this story still to come. We'll be here to break it all down for you the moment it happens. Until then, take care and we'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.